So knowing the personalities, let me give you what I believe is the soil from which this decision on the part of my colleagues at SAR grew. First of all, the guiding principle of education, Chanuch lenar al pi darko, the verse from Mishlei, raise up the young person according to his or her way. In other words, there is no area in Jewish law where individuation is more specifically mandated than in chinuch. If you don't find the child, if you don't identify what will be the unique path to that child's heart, then you are a failure as a mechanech. That is why systems of chinuch, which are straight-laced, one-size-fits-all, the notion of a repressively uniform approach to the education of Jewish children, I believe, is keneged halacha. And we have suffered for that. When educational method becomes a sacrifice on the altar of traditionalism, we will do it because it's the way we did it, we lose children. And I believe there will be a price to pay. I believe that SAR and its faculty have always understood this. The desire to see the individual child, to hear the individual child, to nuance the presentation of Torah to that individual child's capacity to hear and open and understand, has been from the very beginning, and certainly can't help remembering the late Audrey Shergan, Zichrona Livracha. And that spirit that each child is a world, that is SAR at its best. The second component of that soil, I believe, is true Avas Yisrael. And Avas Yisrael means a loving, respectful attitude toward all of Klal Yisrael, toward Jews, and a very strong disinclination to allow into the school a kind of a spirit of judgmentalism and holier-than-thou superiority as one speaks about those whose way of observance differs. That is usually an extremely positive policy. Because, to tell you the truth, in many quadrants of the Jewish world, long before people learn, they learn to hate. And they define themselves in terms of the groups that they have been mandated to disparage. And so you have people who are functionally quite ignorant, who proclaim their membership in the club by the stridency with which they speak of the other. In SAR, that has never been allowed. One scores no points for a kind of blind zealotry, to be dismissive or scornful of other Jews or of non-Jews, for that matter. Right? And those who have been here with me over these many years, I would hope know that spirit of derision is not part of our message. It's for that reason, for example, that despite the Koren Sidur's advice to the contrary and some serious halachic authorities, I have never allowed the Chazan to reintroduce into the Aleinu Shehem Mishtachavim Lehevel Varik, describing those who worship in other religions as people who bow to vanity and emptiness. I don't believe that we need to pray to God through the vehicle of disparagement. That being said, how would I approach a case where people whose sincerity, whose aspirational code I fully endorse and revere, how do I approach it when, on a particular given issue, I might differ? Well, I'll give you an example, which is the interpretation of the Nitziv of a Midrash, which I actually mentioned from the pulpit, I believe it was last week, but I'll mention it again, just in brief. There is a discrepancy in the way in which the anointment of Aaron HaKohen is described in Parshas Tetzaveh when it is prescribed, and the way in which it plays out in Parshas Tzav when it actually happens. Parshas Tetzaveh assumes that Aaron will be anointed together with his sons in a kind of a group anointment. Parshas Tzav, it is clear that Aaron is being lifted above his sons and anointed with a unique process. He is anointed separately. And the Nitziv asks, why did Moshe Rabbeinu change his process after God had already instructed it? And the Nitziv answers based on a midrash, that what has happened between one and the other is the Egel Hazav, is the story of the golden calf. The story of the golden calf is a story of Aaron supporting a popular desire and trying to turn it in the direction of Avodas Hashem, and miscalculating, and instead accidentally giving aid and succor to an energy which took things in another direction. And so here is Moshe Rabbeinu, after this miscalculation, faced with his brother, and instead of questioning whether he deserved to be the Kohen Gadol, he actually promoted him to an even higher level. Why? Because what Moshe looked at was not the specifics of the Egel Hazav, which certainly were a catastrophe by any estimation. What he looked at was what kind of Avas Yisrael, what kind of love for the Jewish people, where Aaron got into the trenches with them and tried to take their energy and move it toward God. What kind of Avas Yisrael was behind such a thing? It was majestic. So Moshe said, what I take out of this is a man who could be motivated by such love, regardless of the fact that in a particular instance it misfired. That love deserves to be raised to the level of the Kahuna Gedola. That love deserves to be at the forefront of the leadership of the Jewish people. And so, even before I would make my comments on this particular decision, looking at the people whom I know to be behind it, even if I disagree on this particular issue, even if I would question the calculations, the mathematics, I respond exactly like Moshe Rabbeinu. That as far as the motivations behind it, as far as the commitment to find each Jewish child, as far as the commitment to the loving respect of Am Yisrael, those are exactly the people who should be in Jewish education. With or without what I would call a specific situational miscalculation. We're not talking about something which pasels. We're talking about something which illustrates a level of attitude and commitment, which is exactly what we should be seeking in those to whom we entrust our children.